Some nights in the OR feel like routine. Others feel like war. But one night felt like standing on the edge of something older, darker, and alive. And that was the night I realized hospitals aren't just for the living. I've spent over a decade under the sterile glow of operating room lights. I've seen organs fail and revive, bones splinter and fuse, lives teeter between heartbeats and monitors. The OR is supposed to be a place of control, a sealed chamber where science holds sway and chaos stops at the scrub sink. But hospitals have their undercurrents. Shadows you don't chart. Whispers that come from empty hallways at 3 a.m. Some people say it's exhaustion or stress or the trick of buzzing fluorescence. I used to believe that too. Until the night of the John Doe case. It started on a stormy Tuesday, the kind of Midwestern squall that rattles window panes and knocks out power lines. I'd been called in on an emergency. Another unidentified trauma patient wheeled in by EMTs with pale faces and trembling hands. That alone was strange. Paramedics don't scare easily. We were short on operating rooms that night, so they opened one of the old theaters, OR 6B, a room I'd only been in once during orientation years ago. A decommissioned wing, walls yellowed from age, a faint smell of mildew no amount of bleach could kill. I was the scrub nurse on call. Dr. Adrian Clark, the surgeon every nurse alternately admired and feared, was in charge. The Dr. Lena Ford handled anesthesia. Marcus Hale, an orderly with more superstition than sense, muttered prayers under his breath as we prepped. The patient on the gurney barely seemed human at first glance. Cold to the touch, pulse erratic, eyes rolled back like a fever dream. No ID, no family. Just a tangle of scars across his abdomen and something about him, an electric tension, that made the hair on my arms rise. I told myself it was just another traumatic night. That medicine, not mystery, was waiting behind the incision. I told myself a lot of things. But when the lights flickered and the monitors started to show symbols instead of numbers, I realized the truth. Science wasn't going to explain what was on that table. And even now, years later, I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. to the smell of iron and ozone, and I see the frost forming on my hands. I've scrubbed in on thousands of operations over the last 12 years. I've seen crushed limbs, gunshot wounds, ruptured aneurysms, organs literally bursting in my gloved hands. You develop a callus inside your soul, a way of compartmentalizing so you can do your job and go home. But every so often something cuts through the callus and leaves a wound that never quite heals. This is that wound. It was a stormy night in March, the kind of night when power flickers and the whole hospital hums like it's alive. The ER called up to the OR desk at 11:47 p.m. We had a level 1 trauma coming in. All our main operating theaters were tied up. The only space left was one of the old rooms in the West Wing, OR 6. A room we normally avoided unless there was absolutely no choice. St. Ignatius Medical Center is over 100 years old. Parts of it have been gutted and rebuilt, but the West Wing is mostly original, cracked tile, heavy wooden doors, flickering fluorescence. You feel it as soon as you walk through, like stepping onto a submarine long sunk and raised again, damp and echoing, and just a little too cold. I stood at the scrub sink, tying my mask, listening to the thunder rolling over the city. My name is Emily Reyes. At the time I was the senior OR nurse on night shift. I had 2 techs and an anesthetist, but no surgeon yet. The ER paramedics were still en route. Marcus, the night orderly, pushed a stainless steel tray past me, its wheels squealing. He muttered, "You really gonna do this one in 6? We're full everywhere else," I said. "Trauma's trauma?" Marcus shook his head. "Place gives me the creeps. Doors slam on their own, monitors flicker. You know Dr. Hayes refused to work here last winter." Said the room was wrong. Wrong how? He just shrugged and looked at the floor. Marcus was a big man but superstitious as a cat. I chalked it up to night shift gossip and kept scrubbing. But even as I dismissed it, a prickle crawled up the back of my neck. We had 10 minutes before the patient arrived. I started laying out the surgical instruments, retractors, scalpels, clamps, sutures. The stainless steel gleamed under the overhead light. Everything else about the room looked a shade too gray. Dr. Adrian Clark walked in with a gust of cold air. He was tall, angular, late 40s, the kind of surgeon who radiated control. I'd worked with him before. Brilliant hands, colder bedside manner. He scanned the room with quick eyes. "This the only room?" he asked.
Yes, doctor.
"All others are occupied." He nodded, but his jaw flexed once. "Fine. Let's make it ready." The door from the hallway burst open and 2 paramedics rolled in a gurney, soaked from the rain. The patient on it was a man in his mid-30s, or at least he looked mid-30s. Unconscious, skin pale with a bluish cast. His chart read, unknown male, no ID, no insurance, found collapsed at an industrial site on the outskirts of town. The paramedics kept their eyes down like they didn't want to talk about it. "What happened?" I asked, taking the clipboard. "Fell or jumped?" One of them said, "Sure. Some kind of electrical event. Sparks, like static. We tried to get a BP, but the cuff fried twice." I looked at the man's arms. Burn patterns crawled up them like black ivy. But beneath the burns, his muscles twitched rhythmically, like there was still current running through them. We transferred him onto the OR table. The monitors flickered, beeped erratically, heart rate 48, then 180, then 0, then 60. I tapped the screen, but it kept skipping like a scratched CD. Dr. Clark frowned. "Get me a central line and a full trauma panel. We're opening him up at 10. Dr. Lena Ford, the anesthetist, stepped in. She was cool, headed, in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled tight. "Vitals are unstable, but the airway is clear. This is weird. Emily, his oxygen saturation is 100% on room air. That's not possible with these burns." I nodded, trying to focus. I'd seen bizarre vitals before. Usually they straightened out once you got the patient under. As we prepped the patient, a thunderclap shook the windows. The fluorescents flickered off and then on. For a second, everything was dark except the pale outline of the man on the table. When the lights returned, his eyes were open. They were a color I've never seen before, like mercury under ice. He looked straight at me, though he couldn't possibly have been conscious. His lips moved slightly. No sound. I leaned closer, just for a heartbeat, and I swear I heard it inside my skull. Not my ears, help me. I jerked back. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Dr. Ford asked. I swallowed hard. Nothing. The man's eyes had closed again. His vitals beeped in ragged little bursts. Marcus stood by the door, making a sign of the cross. "Told you this room's bad." "Out," Dr. Clark snapped. "Everyone has not scrubbed leaves now." Marcus left without another word. I checked the instruments with shaking hands. The cold creeping up from the floor made the hairs on my arms stand on end under my scrubs. Dr. Clark's voice was sharp. "Emily, focus. We're starting anesthesia." Dr. Ford nodded and slid the tube into the patient's trachea, connecting him to the ventilator. She injected the induction drugs. The monitors fluttered but gave no consistent readout. "We're ready?" Clark said. I moved to position the surgical drapes, but my fingers brushed the patient's wrist. Another jolt, like a mild static shock, shot up my arm. And again, a whisper, clearer this time, right behind my eyes. "Don't let him cut me open." My breath caught. I looked at Dr. Clark. "Doctor." "Scalpel," he said, already reaching. I hesitated. "Scalpel." I handed it to him. The metal was colder than it should have been. He hovered over the patient's abdomen. "We'll start with a midline incision." "Ready." "Doctor." Ford glanced at me over her mask. She looked pale, almost green. Outside, thunder rolled again. The fluorescence flickered. The heart monitor spiked to 220, then flatlined. Then I came back at 70. I squeezed my hands into fists. This was still just medicine. Weird vitals, weird night. Nothing more. Still, as Dr. Clark lowered the blade, I felt that crawling prickle again, as if unseen fingers were walking up my spine. The patient's skin seemed to shimmer, like something alive moving beneath it. Then Clark made the first cut, and every single thing in the room, seemed to exhale. The overhead light dimmed a fraction. A smell, not quite blood and not quite ozone, rose from the incision. The heart monitor screamed a warning tone. And in my head, as loud as if someone stood right behind me, a voice said, "You've opened the door." I froze, a scalpel tray in my hands, staring at the gash in the man's abdomen. What I saw there didn't look like tissue. Not exactly. It looked like. For a second after Dr. Clark's blade opened the patient's abdomen, I forgot to breathe. What lay beneath wasn't the neat strata of fascia and muscle I'd memorized from 1,000 cases. It was a lattice of something pale and glistening that looked like frost under a microscope, laced with dark veins pulsing faintly, as if they were breathing on their own. Dr. Clark didn't hesitate. Retractors. My hands moved automatically, though my mind was stuck on the word frost. I slid the retractor tips under the edges of the incision and spread them. Instead of the usual tug of tissue, there was an odd resistance, like stretching plastic. The flesh made a sound. Not a wet tearing, but a soft hiss. "Clamp," Clark ordered. Dr. Ford's eyes were huge above her mask. She adjusted the anesthesia drip. Vitals are still unstable. He's maintaining oxygenation without ventilation. I'm not seeing my chest rise. I glanced at the patient's face. His eyes were shut, but his lips trembled, whispering a syllable I couldn't catch. Marcus's warning replayed in my mind. Doors slam on their own, monitors flicker. Clark reached deeper with gloved hands. "This isn't standard anatomy," he muttered, more to himself than to us. Organs shifted, like congenital malrotation, but extensive. I forced my voice to steady. "Should we page radiology? Another scan?" "No time," Clark snapped. "He's exsanguinating internally. We stabilize first." The monitors squealed. Heart rate 300, then 0, then a flat line across all channels. Dr. Ford grabbed the paddles. He's gone into an asystole, charging 200 joules. "Wait." Clark didn't even look up. "He's still perfusing. Feel his carotid." I pressed 2 fingers to the patient's neck. A slow, massive pulse thumped under my glove. "But..." Dr. Ford stared at the flat line. "There's nothing on the monitor. Equipment's faulty," Clark said tightly. "Keep anesthesia running." A faulty. Right. All 3 monitors simultaneously. The frost-like lattice in the abdomen shifted, almost imperceptibly. Something underneath pressed upward, like a child's hand against a curtain. My stomach lurched. "Retract further," Clark said. I obeyed, pulling until the wound yawned open. The air in the room dropped 5 degrees. Our breaths fogged our face shields. The overhead fluorescence buzzed. The smell of ozone thickened, metallic and sweet, like pennies under a lightning strike. "Doctor," I whispered, "something's wrong." "We're saving a life," he snapped. "Focus." Dr. Ford's voice wavered. "I'm increasing the propofol." He's resisting it. His BIS index is... This can't be right. He's awake under anesthesia. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. "We need to stop." Clark's head jerked toward me, eyes glittering. "You will not stop. Retract." His tone left no room for argument. Still, for the first time in my career, I thought, I don't trust my surgeon. Another flicker of the lights. This time they stayed dimmed, like someone had draped a gray veil over the room. And then the voice came again. "Emily." It vibrated inside my skull, low and unmistakable. "He's not who he says. Don't let him open the vessel." I froze. My hands shook. Did you? Dr. Ford was staring at me. You heard it too. We locked eyes. Both of us had heard the same words. Clark didn't notice. He'd moved on to dissecting a dark cord of tissue that ran where the patient's descending aorta should have been. It pulsed with a rhythm of its own, slow and deep. Doctor, I tried again. There's no anatomy like that. We should close. Scissors, he barked. I didn't hand them to him. My fingers stayed clenched on the tray. He looked up sharply. Nurse rays. Scissors. Now. The pulse under my glove wrist throbbed like a drum. My mind raced. I had never disobeyed a direct order in the OR, but my whole body screamed that if Clark cut that cord, something would happen none of us could undo. The overhead vent rattled. Cold air poured over us. The surgical drapes fluttered though the room was sealed. Clark's eyes narrowed. What's gotten into you? Dr. Ford's voice rose, brittle. Adrian, this isn't surgery anymore. Look at it. He glanced at her with irritation. Do your job, Lena. I'll do mine. Then the cord in the patient's abdomen twitched. A slow coil like a snake shifting in sleep. The monitors all spiked, displaying symbols instead of numbers, as if the software itself had corrupted. I took a step back. This isn't human. Clark's jaw clenched. You're both hysterical. Emily, the voice again. This time louder, almost urgent. Cut power. Leave now. Dr. Ford reached for the anesthesia cart. I'm pulling him off gas. We're waking him up. No. Clark lunged, grabbing her wrist. You'll kill him. She yanked free. He's all ready. Before she could finish, the OR door slammed open. Marcus stood there, eyes wide, sweat running down his temples. Stop, he panted. For God's sake, stop cutting. I saw it. Clark spun. Out! Marcus didn't move. I saw something under the door, black as oil. It's moving. You keep cutting, and it's coming in here. Dr. Ford's hand shook on the vaporizer dial. I'm shutting this down. Clark's face was chalk. White. You'll regret this. Do you know who this man is? His voice cracked, a hairline fracture of fear beneath his anger. The cord in the abdomen flexed again harder. The frost lattice deepened its glow. Yes, it glowed, faintly bluish now. The room's temperature plunged to almost freezing. Our gloves were steamed with condensation. I whispered, Doctor, please. For a moment, he just stood there, scalpel trembling. Then his shoulders squared. I know exactly what I'm doing. He raised the blade toward the cord. That was when the patient's eyes flew open. No sedation could have left him awake like that. He sat bolt upright against the restraints, mouth opening in a soundless scream. His eyes, those mercury, ice eyes, locked on mine. And I heard, louder than anything stop him. The overhead lights blew with a pop, showering us with glass. In the darkness, the only illumination was the faint blue glow from the wound. Dr. Ford screamed. Marcus swore. The ventilator alarm shrieked. Clark sliced downward. I lunged. My gloved hand caught his wrist mid-arc. No! Something like an electrical surge shot through both of us. The blue glow erupted, splashing across our gowns. The smell of ozone became suffocating. The patient's restraints snapped like string. He rose from the table, still bleeding but somehow whole, the wound closing as we watched. His mouth moved, and a sound like static and 100 whispers filled the room. The OR door slammed shut on its own. Marcus pounded on it. It's locked. Ford stumbled back, gasping. Emily, what is happening? I couldn't answer. My hand still clutched Clark's wrist. His face was ashen, eyes wide with something between awe and terror. The patient, or whatever he was, swung his legs off the table. His skin rippled, frost and shadow swirling under the surface. He looked at me again. Emily, open the vent. Only you can. I staggered toward the wall vent, barely aware I was moving. Behind me, Clark shouted something, but his voice was distant, muffled. The vent's grill was cold as dry ice. "Turn it," the voice urged. "Turn and I leave." I grabbed the release handle and twisted it. The grill popped off. A rush of freezing air poured out, smelling of pine forests and iron. The blue glow surged brighter. Clark lunged at me, yelling, "Don't." The patient's hand snapped out, grabbing Clark mid-chest, holding him off the floor like he weighed nothing. Clark convulsed, scalpel clattering to the tiles. Marcus yelled, "Run!" But the door was still sealed. Dr. Ford crouched by the anesthesia cart, crying silently. I stared at the vent. Inside wasn't ductwork. It was a darkness deeper than space, flecked with faint sparks like stars. A low wind roared out of it, though it shouldn't have. "Push him in," the voice said. "Push him in and I go back." I looked at Clark struggling in the patient's grip. His eyes met mine, terrified. "Help me," he rasped. My knees trembled. Was this real? Was I hallucinating from stress? Marcus grabbed my arm. "Emily, what is that?" I shook my head. "I don't know." The patient moved closer to the vent, still holding Clark aloft. His frost flesh flared with color now. Blue, silver, black veins. Now, the voice said, "Or I stay." I reached out to the patient or to Clark. I wasn't sure which. Then the lights flickered back on. The room looked normal again. The patient lay on the table, unconscious, the incision neat and ordinary. Dr. Clark stood where he had been at the start of the cut, scalpel poised. Dr. Ford blinked as if waking from a dream. Marcus was gone. The monitors beeped at normal rhythms. No frost, no blue glow, just blood and tissue like any other trauma case. My heart hammered so hard I could barely stand. Clark frowned at me. "Nurse Race!" "Retract, please." I stared. "What?" He raised an eyebrow. "We're mid-procedure. Focus." The patient lay utterly still, but I swear I saw, the faintest flicker of mercury under his eyelids. The strangest part wasn't the blue glow, or the voice, or Clark hanging weightless above the floor. The strangest part was how quickly it all snapped back to normal. One moment the room had been a storm of shattered lights, freezing air, and something impossible writhing in the patient's chest. The next, everything was neat and sterile again, like someone had shaken and etched a sketch. But I wasn't reset. My body still trembled. My gloves still smelled faintly of ozone and iron. Clark looked at me expectantly, scalpel in hand, as though nothing had happened. "Retract, Nurse Reyes." I wet my lips. "Doctor, we just..." His gaze hardened. Now, my hands moved without permission, slipping the retractors back into place. Part of me screamed, "Don't," but another part. The obedient nurse drilled to follow orders in a high-stakes OR. Overrode it. The incision gaped. This time, the tissue beneath looked closer to normal. Muscle, fat, fascia, a little odd in texture, but human enough. Clark leaned in, methodical again. "We'll locate the bleeder first." I forced myself to breathe. Maybe the stress, the storm, the flickering power, maybe we'd all hallucinated for a moment. Mass hysteria wasn't unheard of. The mind could be tricked. Right? Then Dr. Ford spoke, her voice strained. "Adrian, something's wrong with his anesthesia." Clark didn't look up. Just the dosage." "I have. Twice. He's metabolizing at an impossible speed." She held up the syringe. I just pushed an additional bolus. It should have him deep under for at least 20 minutes. "Vitals?" Clark asked. "Stable. Too stable," Ford muttered. "No fluctuation, no reaction. BIS index reads 0, but his brain waves are spiking like he's fully conscious." My chest tightened. "Are you saying he's awake?" She hesitated. "Not in a way I understand." I glanced at the patient's face. His eyelids twitched as if in REM sleep. His lips parted slightly. For a fraction of a second, I swore I saw vapor curl from his mouth. Not breath, but something darker. Clark snapped. "We don't have the luxury of mystery. Maintain anesthesia." We proceed. Ford's eyes narrowed. If he's aware under sedation, this is torture. Oh, do your job, Clark shot back. Ford bit her lip, but adjusted the IV. I caught the tremor in her hands. I turned back to the table and froze. The patient's fingers twitched. Just once, a small spasm, but unmistakable. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Clark didn't respond. He was tracing a path along the intestines with the tip of his scalpel. His eyes gleamed too brightly. "Doctor," I pressed. His hand moved. "Muscle reflex," he said curtly. "Ignore it." But when I looked again, the patient's hand twitched a second time, fingers curling into a fist before relaxing. Reflexes didn't do that. The monitors beeped steady as a metronome, ignoring everything. Then I heard it a hiss. At first I thought it was the ventilator, but the hiss resolved into words, faint and ragged. "Emily." My scalp prickled. I looked at Ford, and from her wide eyes I knew she'd heard it too. Clark, though, worked as if nothing happened. The patient's lips moved again, unmistakably shaping syllables, though no air passed through his throat. "Don't let him." Ford's hands hovered over the IV line. "Adrian, stop. He's communicating." Clark's voice was ice. "He's dying. Unless we correct the hemorrhage, there will be nothing left to communicate." I couldn't help it. I leaned close to the patient's ear. "What do you want me to do?" His eyelids fluttered. His voice slid directly into my skull, bypassing my ears. "Turn off the gas." I reeled back. The anesthesia machine hissed steadily, isoflurane flowing. Ford stared at me, whispering, "What did he say?" Before I could answer, the heart monitor spiked wildly. Beep, 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 beep. Flatline. Ford grabbed the paddles. "He's crashing!" Clark's scalpel didn't stop. "Ignore the machine." Ford blinked. "Ignore. Adrian, he's flatlining." Clark's voice rose, sharp as glass. "Do you feel a pulse, Reyes?" I pressed trembling fingers to the patient's carotid. A throb met me, stronger than before. "Yes," I whispered. Ford froze. "That's impossible." The monitor continued its flat tone, but under my fingertips the patient's pulse was steady. Clark snapped. "The machines are lying. The body doesn't." I wanted to scream. The body also wasn't supposed to speak telepathically or glow like frost under the skin. Ford lowered the paddles slowly. Her lips trembled. "This isn't medicine anymore." Clark glared at her. "Step out if you can't handle it. Emily and I will finish." The storm outside pounded against the old windows. The OR door rattled faintly, as if something pushed from the other side. I stared at the patient's face, pale under the drape. His eyelids fluttered again. "Gas," the voice pressed. "Turn off the gas or I'll never wake." Ford licked her lips. "Emily, what is he telling you?" Clark's head jerked up. His eyes were sharp, predatory. "What did you say?" I swallowed hard. Nothing. Ford looked between us, then at the vaporizer dial. Her hand inched toward it. Clark saw. "Don't you dare." Her hand froze. A sudden crash echoed through the room, a tray tipping over by itself. Instruments clattered across the floor. We all jumped. Clark's eyes darted around, furious. Who? But no one was near the tray. Ford whispered, "This room." The lights dimmed again. Not flickered. Dimmed, as if someone was turning down a rheostat. The blue glow seeped faintly from the patient's wound again, curling like smoke. And his mouth opened. No sound came at first. Just a long exhale of vapor, dark and shimmering. Then a noise, low and layered, like a choir singing backwards. Ford clapped her hands over her ears. "Oh, God." Clark leaned in, almost entranced. "Extraordinary." The vapor coiled upward, brushing the overhead light. It smelled of burnt metal and wet earth. The patient's body convulsed, arching off the table. Restraints creaked. His eyes snapped open, glowing faintly silver, and the voice thundered inside my skull, no longer faint. "Turn off the gas." I staggered back. My hands gripped the vaporizer dial before I realized I'd moved. Clark roared, "Raise! Don't touch that!" But Ford was beside me, her own hands trembling on the dial. "He's begging us," she whispered. The monitors erupted into chaos, numbers cascading too fast to read. The surgical lights above sputtered. Clark lunged toward us. "If you turn that off, you'll kill him." The patient's voice ripped through me, undeniable. "No, you'll kill me if you don't." I twisted the dial. The hiss of gas cut off. Instantly, the patient collapsed back against the table, eyes rolling white, body still. The blue glow dimmed. For a heartbeat, silence. Only the storm outside. Then the heart monitor chirped. Beep, beep, a steady rhythm, perfectly normal. Ford exhaled a sob. Clark's face was livid. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I whispered. We listened to him. Clark's gaze cut into me like a scalpel. His voice dropped low, almost a growl. "You have no idea who he is. No idea what you've unleashed." I stared back, heart pounding. "Then tell me." The room was still. Even the storm seemed to pause. Clark leaned closer, eyes like dark knives. "This man is not just a patient. He's a containment." My skin crawled. "Containment of what?" Clark's lips thinned. "Pray you never find out." The patient's chest rose and fell evenly, as though nothing had happened. But his lips curled into the faintest smile. And in my head, softer now but certain, I heard, "Thank you, Emily." I'd never felt tension like that in an OR. Not during codes, not during mass casualties, nothing. The air itself was heavy, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Clark's words hung over us like a curse. "He's a containment." My stomach flipped. "Containment of what?" I repeated. He ignored me, focusing instead on the wound. "Retract again." Ford whispered, "Emily." But I was already moving. Habit still ruled my hands. The retractor tips slid under the edges of the incision. This time the tissue gave way as if it wanted to open. Underneath, the frost lattice was back, brighter now, pulsing faintly with each beep of the monitor. Clark reached in with his gloved hands. "There's the vessel," he murmured. "If we tie it off." I saw what he meant. A dark cord ran deeper than the abdominal cavity should allow, vanishing into a space that looked less like tissue and more like a tunnel lined with pale ribs. Ford gasped. "That's not anatomy." Clark's eyes glittered. "This isn't medicine anymore. This is history." He extended a clamp. "Scissors!" I hesitated. "Doctor, scissors!" My hand trembled, but I passed them. He snipped the cord. A sound like tearing cloth and a low animal moan filled the room. The frost lattice pulsed violently. A black ichor seeped up, spreading across the drapes like spilled ink. The monitors went haywire. Numbers scrambled into symbols. The OR lights flickered red for an instant. The patient's eyes flew open. He screamed. But the sound didn't come from his mouth. It came from the walls. Ford stumbled back, knocking over a tray. "Adrian, stop!" Clark's face was pale but exultant. "Do you see? It's real. All of it." The frost lattice split wider, revealing a void beneath, black and studded with faint stars like the vent had been. A wind blew from it, chilling to the bone, smelling of iron and pine needles. The patient's body convulsed, restraints snapping. His chest cracked open not along Clark's incision, but along some inner seam. Something inside unfurled, thin, silver, filamentous. It reached for Clark. He laughed once, a wild sound, and leaned closer. I grabbed his sleeve. "We have to close him up!" Ford shouted. "Emily, help me!" We tried to pull Clark back, but the filaments coiled around his arms, pulling him toward the void. The patient sat up, half human, half something else, mercury eyes glowing. He looked at me. "You opened me. Now you must choose." My heart pounded. "Choose what? Containment or freedom?" The filaments tightened around Clark. He screamed, "Don't listen!" Ford clutched my arm. "Emily, what do we do?" The void deepened, sucking loose instruments across the floor toward it. The surgical lights above swayed. "Push him in," the voice said again. "Push him in and I go back." "Push who?" I whispered. The patient's eyes flared silver. "The one who cut me," Clark thrashed. "Help me! Race! For God's sake!" Ford stared at me, tears streaming under her mask. "If this is real, maybe it's the only way." The void howled louder. I moved forward, reaching for Clark's wrists. He clung to me, eyes desperate. "Emily," he gasped, "I saved your career. I saved lives. Don't let it." The filaments yanked harder. I thought of all the times I'd handed him a scalpel without question, all the things I'd seen him do for glory rather than the patient. I pushed. The filaments whipped Clark off the floor, dragging him into the black maw. His scream cut off like a switch flipped. Instantly the wind stopped. The frost lattice sealed over the void. The monitors went silent, then beeped normally. The patient collapsed back on the table, the incision gone, as if it had never been. Ford and I stood frozen, breathing hard. The OR looked like nothing had happened. No ichor, no frost, no void. Just a man on a table asleep. Ford whispered, "Where's Adrian?" I looked around. "One?" We backed toward the door. It opened easily now. The hallway beyond was empty and silent except for the storm. The patient's eyes flickered open one last time. He smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said inside my head, containment restored. Then he closed his eyes and lay still. I quit St. Ignatius 6 weeks later. My resignation letter was polite, citing burnout and family reasons. But the truth was I couldn't set foot in an OR without tasting ozone on my tongue and seeing frost bloom across the drapes. The official story was that Dr. Adrian Clark took a sudden leave of absence and never returned. Administration said he'd gone off the grid. Ford transferred to another hospital. Marcus disappeared from the schedule entirely. No one asked me for details. Or if they did, they didn't want the answers. I still don't know who that man was on the table. The paperwork showed no name, no transfer records, no discharge summary. The hospital claimed the trauma case was misfiled and no longer in their system. His body, if he was even human, simply vanished. But at night, sometimes, I hear the monitors in my dreams. I smell the iron and pine of that impossible wind. And I see Clark's face as the filaments pulled him away, eyes wild, not with pain, but with something like revelation. People ask me why I left the OR. They expect stories about long hours or emotional exhaustion. I just smile and say, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Because how do you explain a night like that? How do you tell anyone you watched a man cut open a living prison for something older than humanity, and you were the one who decided who lived and who vanished? I tell myself I did the right thing, that I restored the containment, that I saved more lives than I cost. But sometimes, late at night, my hands still smell like the black ichor that never was. And sometimes in the dark, I hear a whisper, "You opened the door," and I wake up drenched in cold sweat, hands clenched, waiting for frost to form on the sheets. This was my most unexplained case as an OR nurse, and this one still haunts me.
Subscribe for more videos.